students will say like, so a lot of students will say, why do I even need to know this? This has nothing.
Sorry, I think we just lost Dr. Lovie. Give me one moment. One second here. Sorry about that. Sorry, she's coming back in.
Oh my God, that was so inelegant. I'm sorry.
No, no worries. We just lost you there. It's okay. I just hit the record button, so we could just start over again.
It's fine. Like I need you to able the sharing again. Sorry about this, you guys. That's what.
Give me one moment.
This is what happens when I start pushing buttons on the computer and I don't belong anywhere near the buttons.
There now.
So what I was yammering on about before all of this was that, you know, what I'm starting to see from a lot of the students in the clinic is they're actively asking, why do they even need to know this kind of stuff? And I get the frustration. 100% I get the frustration. You know, it's one of those things that can feel a little bit intimidating. And because we weren't trained in it. I don't know about you, but when I was a student, I didn't actually see any of this until I wound up doing the doctoral program. And even when I did the doctoral program, the training in it was subpar. And the training in it was coming from a naturopath. It wasn't coming from a Chinese medicine practitioner. So I wasn't learning at the time how to actually read blood work that would be useful in a way to us, you know, as a way to actually back up our Chinese medicine pattern diagnoses. You know, the blood work would come in and I'd be like, okay, this is interesting. Your AST is elevated, your ALT is elevated, creatinine is here, like I see C-reactive protein, but it didn't mean anything to me because it wasn't really going to be affecting how I was placing the needles or, you know, unless I did something stupid with the herbs accidentally and put someone into jaundice, right? That would really be the only time that like I'd look at it. But I think, you know, you all know that my bread and butter, fortunately or unfortunately, it happens to be Hashimoto's. So that means I am neck deep in blood work every single day. And since then, I've formally, I would say, become a blood work junkie. I love blood work. I live for blood work. I wish I could order blood work. I will tell you, though, that there are other senior acupuncturists in the field, even senior to me, that do not want it in our scope of practice. Because quite frankly, in New York, scope of practice is you test, you treat. And so quite a few physicians are just like, well, we're not really going to be able to treat this, right? But it is scope of practice in places like Nevada or Florida or California. And when we shift how we think about this from, okay, like, yes, like ALT, AST, you know, liver, whatever, when we start looking at it as a way to investigate if there are patterns that we are missing. Because the issue with this is we do not continue ongoing training with tongue and pulse. It is very rare that people are continuing that ongoing training. And tongue and pulse, when that training is done well and when that training is done long term, it's both qualitative and quantitative. But once we graduate, and unless we find, you know, a teacher like a Leon Hammer or a Chris Chan, or, you know, someone to continue that education, like we don't wind up going down that path in a way that's relevant, right? It's like, okay, the pulse, I guess I can kind of feel COVID in that, right? I find a lot of practitioners, year 3, 6, 9, they still can't tell me the difference between a tight or a wiry pulse. So, you know, and that's not by like any stretch of the imagination, that's not a slam. It's just, it shows a lack of education in the field in the US anyways, right? So when we do have access to blood work, we can start parsing out the blood work to look for patterns, and we can start using the blood work to say like, okay, what else am I missing? Right? What is it that I'm not seeing here? Maybe I see kidney yang deficiency, I see spleen qi deficiency, I see liver qi stagnation. It's like, yeah, you and everyone else in New York, right? But is there anything else that's riding under the surface? And the fact that we do have access to CBCs and blood panels, and once we can start kind of getting our head around some of this and start kind of understanding where this has value add, we can start having more sophisticated conversations with MDs, with nurse practitioners in the West. We can start understanding a little bit better how our herbs, like what this is doing with herbs, if we're herbalists, even if we're not herbalists, you know, when patients say they start feeling better, it's like, great. And by the way, your C-reactive protein is coming down. That's really amazing. Like patients can say like, you know, I just got this thyroid panel and it's really weird because my TGAB, my TPO, like my antibodies went down, but my TSH spiked, and the doctor wants to put me on more medication even though I'm feeling better. And so when we understand, you know, the feedback loops and why a change like that in the blood work would happen, we can start to advocate for patients to be like, well, you're feeling better, and now is maybe not legally, of course we can't say this, but like we can think like now is actually not the time for them to go up on the medication, because there's usually a hiccup. The body will actually kick up TSH when the TPOs go down. It's like a little bit of a whiplash, and the TSH will come down in time anyways. And we understand TSH to be a hot hormone. It's qi, it's the body trying to self-regulate. So the conversation, I think, starts to get much more interesting, and hopefully this is interesting for you guys as well. Okay, so any questions out of the gate with this? Any questions with that kind of intro? I have the chat box open and I'm pretty good. I've got my eye on it. So just dump questions into that chat box and I'll try and catch them as I can. And I'm really going to try and make this not too dry for the next hour and a half. So where I wanted to start with you guys, I wanted to start with a basic metabolic panel, right? Because this is kind of standard Quest, LabCorp. This is like, you know, you go get your annual done, they're going to run a metabolic panel. And like, I had to kind of decide if I wanted to do like a CBC or a metabolic, but the metabolic panel is going to give us a little bit broader understanding of different functions just beyond the blood, and, you know, meaning like Shen, heart, that kind of thing. So in the metabolic panel, normally they're going to be testing for glucose, lipids, liver function, kidney function, electrolytes, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, thyroid, but they're going to be doing really high level thyroid, maybe an A1C, and then a C-reactive protein. This is really kind of like the basics, right? This is, you go to your PCP, you know, you go for your annual pap smear, they pull some blood. This is usually going to be what's in there in some shape or form. Now, unfortunately, this is a lot of blood work to go through in 90 minutes. So I decided to parse it down to, let's just really look at some basic key kidney function markers, key liver function markers. We're going to look at one key cardiovascular marker, and then the holistic thyroid panel, because that's my bias and that's my jam, and I can talk about that for hours, and this is my talk. So there we go. Now, if we're looking at the metabolic function for the kidney function, the key things that we're going to look at is we're going to look for the BUN, the BUN, which is kidney function overall health. And we're going to be digging into each of these individually. So we're going to be looking at creatinine, which measures the kidney function and muscle breakdown. And then we're going to look at the glomerular filtration rate. an estimate of kidney function. This is actually, I could talk about just EGFR for 2 hours. I could literally talk about this one for 2 hours because this even starts to get into intersectional history of who decides what is healthy for what population, for what gender, for what race. Like this is like a whole bigger conversation, but I want to get this one on your radar. We're going to be looking at the metabolic panel for the liver function as well. So ALT, AST, ALP, and then bilirubin. And I'm going to give you guys some shorthand that I think of in my head when I read this. It's when you can see, right? I don't think like alanine aminotransferase. I think like long-term, short-term, but we'll get to that. The only one that we're going to look at in terms of the heart, we're going to look at C-reactive protein because we can actually mine a ton of information from this one number. And then, of course, just the metabolic panel. So for thyroid, so I'm going to look at TSH, T4, T3, TPOs, TGABs, ferritin, vitamin D. And I wanted to, again, like when I was talking at Symposium this year, one of the things that I said was that the Hashis, I like Hashis as an entry point to discuss Chinese medicine. So this is always the entry point because we can start using this Western, it's the same way that we can use headaches, for example, as an entry point to talk about Chinese medicine and with doctors, patients, that kind of thing, because we don't have just one type of headache. We have 15, 16 different types. Same thing with Hashis, we have 15, 16 different types. So I like to use this because I have a case study for it at the end that we're going to look at. And that being said, if you guys want to take a screenshot of this, you can take a screenshot of this one. I would suggest Command Shift 4, highlight it, snap it if you want. But so this is like just a quick and dirty look at what we're talking about tonight. You can see like it's already a lot. But hopefully we'll get you guys some like good info here. Okay, so let's start though with things that affect the blood work and things that you have to keep in mind when looking at blood work, because like I said, yes, it's qualitative and quantitative, but there's a lot of moving parts to it. So reference ranges do not always reflect what is healthy. A reference range is determined by the lab, and the lab determines the reference range based on what's in that population, general population. So what I mean by that, for example, let's just say sperm count. This is a good one, sperm count. So LabCorp, whoever's testing, sperm counts in New York versus Austin versus Toronto, Canada versus Minneapolis versus San Francisco. The lab in those areas set what the average healthy rate is. That's who determines it. So it's not standard, it's not standardized. And what we've been seeing over the past 30 years is sperm rates are going down. So what is considered within range in 2023 was not the standard that was considered within range in 2003, in 1983, and 1973. Let me give you another example. Another example is vitamin D. So vitamin D, the standard range for vitamin D is anything under 10 is considered deficient. 10 to 20 is considered insufficient. 30 and above is considered sufficient. Now, what happened with that? It used to be the minimum number for sufficiency was 50. A blood serum level of 50, and it changed from 50 to 30 because nobody was hitting that. And so the standard for that was dropped to 30 because that's the minimum for bone health. 50 is the minimum, generally, like give or take. So 50 is the minimum for immune health, for psychological health, for inflammatory stuff. So even though the lab will tell you, oh, your vitamin D level is at 32, you're healthy, you're good, that does not reflect what's healthy. What's healthy is something between 50 to 80. So is this making sense for you guys so far? Are these clear examples? These are good examples? Okay, great. So reference ranges are determined, like I said, by each individual lab. And a normal result in one lab can be abnormal in another. So again, you know, if you're working with a patient long term, you know, what I will often tell patients is pick a lab and stick with it. Don't lab hop. So if you're with Quest, stay with Quest. If you're with LabCorp, stay with LabCorp. If you're with Stony Brook or something, stay with Stony Brook. Because even the reference ranges, how the information, the equipment is calibrated is different between the labs. There's a lot of things that can actually affect normal versus abnormal. You know, another example I can give you is that I was doing some Hashi coaching with a patient that was based out of Tel Aviv. And he had access to pretty good blood work. And I said, historically, like, let me look at what you have. And so he sent me historically what he had, and his TPOs, like historically, over time, it just said over 600. Over 600. We don't know how much over 600, right? We just know it's over 600. We don't know it's 601, if it's 6,000, is if it's 60,000. We don't know, because that's where the machine stopped. So we don't so we're a little bit leaning on the machines as well, right? And then I started looking, and I was like, this is really, 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 really weird, because your TPO says over 600, and then your TGAB, every time they take it, they say it's 9. Every time they took it, like the past 2 years, they say it's 9. And so when it's graphed out, it's a straight line. And I told him, it's like, there's no straight lines in nature. There's just not, right? And there's no straight lines in blood work either. There's usually a little bit of variation with this, and the fact that every time you go, it's 9, it's 9, it's 9, it's 9. It's not 7.25, it's not 8, it's not within range, that it's like consistent every single time you go. I think there's something wrong with the machine. Like, you're gonna have to find a different lab. Like, that lab is doing you dirty, and like, we don't actually like know what's going on. So that's another thing, is that sometimes if you can get lab work like over time from the same lab, you can actually see if it's a good lab, where it's about like, not all labs are made equal. You know, and abnormal results don't always mean disease, right? Because it's just getting marked by the lab. So again, we're taking all of this with a grain of salt. We're taking it with a grain of salt, and we're using it just to mine information, because normal results don't always mean health. Like I said, like that vitamin D level, if normal is 32, but we're saying you should probably be over 50, it doesn't mean that your vitamin D is good at 32. So let's look at other things that affect blood work when somebody goes in. Another thing that's going to affect blood work is fasting. So time of the last meal, like that can shift glucose, it can shift lipid, that kind of thing. So, you know, like I just had a patient tonight who we were just talking to, actually just before I jumped on the Zoom, and she's like, oh, that blood work I've been meaning to get, blah, 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 blah. Do I have to fast for it? And I'm just like, yes, it's standard, because we really actually need to get like your resting glucose level. You also need to know that prescription drugs, supplements, and over-the-counters can alter blood results. So for example, biotin, like, we love the biotin because it makes our eyelashes, our hair, and our skin, and like our nails, like makes it on fire. Like, we look so cute, and it can actually throw a TSH. It can throw a TSH. So patients who are on B vitamin complex that have biotin, or they're on Nutrafil, or, you know, a lot of like the quote unquote like beauty vitamins, they all have biotin in them. The American Thyroid Association recommends that you stop taking biotin 48 hours before a blood test. So, you know, you want patients, you know, when you're talking with them, like, did you take vitamins? Like, what was going on? Did you wind up taking Aleve? When was the last time you took your meds? Did you wind up taking Advil? You know, were you taking whatever? You do want a log of that. And you want them doing it consistently, because it's going to consistently affect the blood work. Exercise. So exercise can affect creatinine, and we're going to look at creatinine tonight. So things like, you know, if they had a really, 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 really hardcore workout, like they had a really hardcore workout on a Sunday, and then they took their blood on Monday, that creatinine's going to spike. And so that's just something we want to be aware of. That doesn't necessarily mean their kidneys are failing. It just means like they went for an extra long run, or, you know, if you go do the marathon on a Sunday and you test your blood on Monday, that blood is going to be cranked out on Monday. You might want to wait a little bit to take it. You know, things like alcohol consumption can impact liver function and lipid profiles. So I usually tell patients, you know, maybe like, take your blood, take it like later in the week if you can, you know, so you're not sitting so close to whatever you were doing over the weekend. Menstrual cycle. This is a really, really, really big one. I'm constantly asking patients, you know, when did you take your blood in relationship to your last period? Because if you're taking, you know, we know in Chinese medicine, we have like yin, yang, qi, and blood phase of the period. Those phases, they're going to affect what the blood markers are. They're especially going to affect if, for example, you know, that patient was taking a panel, like an FSH panel, an LH panel, if they were taking some sort of like estrogen, progesterone, whatever. We need to know where in the cycle they were when that blood was drawn. And then time of day. So if they're doing like a cortisol test, time of day, you know, qi moves through the day. She absolutely moves through the day. So we want to know, did you have this taken done like at a spleen time? Were you in the heart time? Were you in the urinary bladder time? Because those are the organs that are. So when we talk about diurnal clock, one of the things that I think about is often forgotten in Chinese medicine. You know, the diurnal clock, we have like opposites of it, right? So for example, like one is like noon is heart, and midnight is gallbladder. I think that's one that we all know and we're all kind of comfortable with. But what winds up happening is at noon, the heart takes over and the gallbladder actually rests a little bit. And then at night, at midnight, it's the gallbladder takes over and the heart gets a chance to rest a little bit. You know, at some point, like you're doing the Lord's work, even the Lord rested on Sunday. So our organs have to rest at some point. So we do want to know the time of day that blood was taken. And then if there was a recent illness, if there's an infection, or, you know, if they're just getting on the other side of a cold, because that's going to affect like red, white blood cell counts, that kind of thing. And then stress, you know, emotional stress is going to influence hormones. And we're not really necessarily looking at blood pressure, but 100%, you can never underestimate what stress does to the body. So we want to know exactly how much stress were they under, if there was any sort of like a stressful event that happened within the 48 to 72 hours before that, or if we're looking at a chronic stressful situation. We need to know recent injuries. You know, did they fall off their bike? Did they, I don't know, get into a fist fight on the 7 train? I don't know. I don't know what injuries people are having these days. Did they break their foot? Did they, you know, roll improperly in jiu-jitsu and pull a rib? Because that's going to shift inflammation markers. And then it can also create muscle damage, which is going to throw the creatinine, the kidney numbers. And it can also create like blood changes. So, you know, red blood cell, white blood cell counts, hemoglobin, that can all shift. You know, if somebody was biking and they got knocked by a taxi and they wound up with a bone bruise. So again, things we want to keep in mind with the blood work. And then clotting factors. Injuries can affect the blood's ability to clot. And so you know, the APTT, like this is not something you're necessarily going to see in a CBC. This is going to be like more advanced blood work that'll be coming through. But again, we just want it on our radar. And then the season, right? Season 100% is going to shift things. So vitamin D tends to be lower in the winter and higher in the summer. That's kind of a no-brainer. But allergy season, so spring and fall, we are going to be seeing an increase in eosinophils and basophils, potentially affecting certain blood tests. So, you know, if they have seasonal allergies, or if they're living with a cat or something and they're allergic to the cat, like that's going to shift things in March versus June versus December. So we kind of look at it, but we don't necessarily need to get worried about it. And then, you know, the prevalence of certain infections like the flu or respiratory viruses, you know, Haylong and I were just talking about, like, if you've been flying recently, when I was on the plane from San Diego, everyone had a juicy cough. It was just like this juicy, gnarly, wet cough that like I'm even hearing on the trains right now. And I'm back to masking on the trains. You know, I'm even back to masking in a taxi. Like the taxi driver was coughing up loogies the other night because 'tis the season. And like all my patients, all of them have been coming in with colds. They've all been coming in with like a touch of COVID. They've all been coming in with something. And so, but that's why that's another seasonal thing that we need to keep in mind, that that is going to shift the blood work. And what I didn't mention here too is the thyroid is seasonal as well. So the thyroid, TSH, T4, T3, I don't have the slides in here. It's in another deck, but TSH, T4, T3 reacts seasonally. So it actually goes up in summer, down in winter. And if you talk with really, really old school endocrinologists, most of them have, like, when I say old school, I mean they're like in their 80s or 90s. They've got one foot in the grave, right? When I say old school, like these old school guys, they actually used to shift medication for their patients seasonally. They actually used to bring the medication up in winter and they down the medication a little bit in summer, because they're just like, you just don't need as much. Because even if the body is in a state of stress, you know, you're part of your environment. And because you have the heat and the warmth and the yang, I mean, they didn't say yang, right? But like, we know that's what they meant. But they have the heat and the yang and everything from the system, the season, from the environment. They don't need that in the medication. So let's start looking at this through the lens of Chinese medicine, but I just want to catch a breath here with you guys and see if there are any questions outstanding before we plow through. Feel free to like throw it in the chat box or raise your hand. Yes. Let's see, Sarah, see?
Yeah, I just had a question about like obviously where we are in our menstrual cycle will impact like hormone panels and blood work, but do you see it affecting any other type of labs that come through, or do you consider it when you're looking at any other labs?
I absolutely consider it when I'm looking at kidney labs, and I consider it when I'm looking at C-reactive or inflammatory markers, because there's good inflammation
Okay.
and there's not good inflammation, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so proglastogen inflammation at the beginning of a cycle, like that's good inflammation. We like that. We need that, right? There's going to be a little bit of inflammation at ovulation. There's going to be a little bit of inflammation actually when we get pregnant too. So those markers are going to shift, and cholesterol markers are going to shift. Cholesterol markers are out, so like cholesterol, like if we're a little bit more inflamed, and we're going to talk about this with the C-reactive piece here in a few minutes. When we're a little bit more inflamed, the cholesterol panel is going to go up, the lipid profile is going to go up a little bit. So it's, you know, again, you know, if we're not looking at lipids tonight, but another example is no, you know what? So I'm going to put a pin in this. I'm going to save this a little bit for the C-reactive because it's going to make more sense in C-reactive. Okay, question. What if
Thank
you
you
live
so
in a,
much.
you're very welcome. Did you say 30 is the minimum for bone health? Yes, 30 is the minimum for bone health, 50 for vitamin D, 50 is the minimum for psychological and immune health. And so generally we want to see people with vitamin D between 50 and 80. What if you live in a tropical climate? Will the thyroid levels still change? Yeah, they'll still change, right? But you're not going to have to like take that, like if the climate is much more stable and we don't have 50, 60-degree swings, that's just not something we're going to necessarily take into account. But the thyroid numbers are going to change in relationship to their health profile, whatever is happening in the health, but like the environment's more stable. There was, I don't really see, I had this supervisor years ago who, I'm kind of a dick when I'm a supervisor, but this guy was like a super dick. And like I remember that like he walked in and he looked at this patient and he goes, "You don't need acupuncture, you need to move to Tucson." And he walked out of the room. And I was just like, what the hell? And I was just like, can you explain that a little bit? Like, I was just like, I want to understand this attitude. And he was just like, this patient is so inflamed and so damp. They're living in the Northeast. We are damp in the Northeast. They're never going to dry out. The only way that they're ever going to dry out is if they move to the desert for at least like 3 years. Otherwise, they're going to be fighting that damp the rest of their life. And like, we're not going to make much of a dent to it. So there's always that environmental factor. Let's see. Can we get a copy of the slides? I love you, Dorothy. No. And what kind of factors would affect a lipid profile with hereditary lipidemia? So that's one of those, like, that's a hard one. Like the factors that are going to affect that is just Jing. That's how we have to read it. We have to read it as something going on with the Jing. So it's not necessarily what's going to affect the lipid profile. It's how we're going to interpret that as Chinese medicine practitioners. So I hope that answers that. All right. So let's dig into this a little bit more. So have you guys seen The Spirit of the Blood yet? Put out by Randine Lewis. This is a new book. It's absolutely fabulous. It's very Jeffrey Yuen based. It's very much more classical Chinese medicine. It's very much in the spirit of like Anne Cecil Sturman or Kimberly Wilson or like those kind of guys. So it gets into like the Hun and the Po and the creation of blood. It's a good book. It's a good book. And then there's another book by Claire Pyers, if you haven't come across this one. This one, I think if you order a hard copy, it's like $300 in a hard copy. If you order Kindle, it's like 10 bucks. So you can actually get this on Kindle. And I highly suggest that you look at her website. So she teaches classes on this. She's based out of Australia. She has classes in all kinds of stuff, but she has a really good starting place. I mean, this conversation that we're having tonight as a meetup is a good starting place, but as a reference document, this is where I started with a lot of the reference pieces to it. You can't, when you read the book though, you can see her kind of working through how to do some of this blood work in it. Like she's kind of jumping to some conclusions. So there's not a huge consensus on that because look, we are at least 4,000 years into this medicine, if not more. We are 50 years into blood work, maybe a little bit more. So the blood work is relatively new on the scene. And what I encourage you guys, and I encourage us to continue interacting with the medicine and continue using blood work and continue having these conversations so we can continue to refine what a lot of this means and that we can set the standards for our own community rather than having people set the standards for us. But these are the two good places that I highly recommend that you start. Okay, so one way to start kind of breaking down the blood work is just break it down into what we know, right? We know spleen, we know liver heat, we know liver gallbladder, we know internal heat, and we know kidney. We know this. We know this like the back of our hand. We've had training in this. This is what we do in clinic. This is, what we do in our offices. This is what we do when moving with patients on a day-to-day. So spleen, things that kind of fall more into the spleen category are going to be things like glucose, urea. We're going to talk about urea tonight. Creatinine. We're going to talk about creatinine tonight. Bilirubin. We're going to talk about bilirubin tonight. Protein, albumin, globulin. These are very much more spleen qi, spleen yang, spleen whatever type numbers. Liver gallbladder. Now look, bilirubin and glucose fall into two different categories. That's totally okay. So does Xiaoyao-san. Xiaoyao-san treats both the liver and the spleen. So this is not like just a one, like, these things, like we're looking at it through a prism and we're looking at it through a prism in a way, just again, to start pulling information. So bilirubin, glucose, ALT, ALP, AST, chloride, urea. Internal heat. So markers for internal heat are going to be things like albumin, chloride, potassium, sodium, protein, urea, AST, globulin. A lot of these things are electrolytes that we're looking at. A lot of these things are We can see, like, for example, like potassium, sodium. So they're vitamins and minerals. You know, the body, when the body is in a state of heat, it's going to want to come back to homeostasis, and it's going to use whatever resources it has on hand to get there. So folks who are in an internal heat, so that could be a yin fire, that could be an autoimmune, that could be chronic inflammation, they're going to burn through antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals faster than someone that's not in that state, because the body is using those things to cool down. And so that's why a lot of this stuff is actually a marker to see if there's internal heat. Kidney, let's keep going with the kidney, calcium, bicarbonate, creatinine, chloride, urea, potassium, sodium are all markers of kidney health. Now, that being said, that's too big of a conversation for just like a quick and dirty meetup conversation. So I'm going to save the spleen for next time, because that's at least like a 2-hour conversation, right? And that's not to kick the can down the road, but I want to give you guys a taste of something, and I want to give you guys something that you can actually put to work tomorrow, right? That, like, if you start getting blood work, like, you can actually start reading through some of this. So liver, we're going to look at the bilirubin, glucose, ALT, LP, AST. I think I'm a little biased with the liver because everyone in New York City has liver Chi stagnation. It's consistently the one of the diagnoses du jour. So I wanted to be able to really talk about the liver. We're going to talk about the C-reactive, and this is going to come back to Sarah's question. That's going to start answering like a lot of these like inflammatory questions for us. What do we expect to change throughout the cycle? And then we're going to look at just like bun, creatinine, and GFR, because those are quick and easy markers of kidney Chi. So again, BUN is going to assess kidney function, overall health, creatinine, and then the eGFR is the estimated glomerular filtration rate. So BUN, it's actually a marker, believe it or not. We can use it to look for things such as Gu syndrome. We can use it to look for yin fire and other pathologies that are showing up in the digestive tract, upset, and overall disharmony in the middle jiao or the lower jiao is often associated with this. Now, what is it? Like how did we get to this Chinese medicine conclusion? Well, urea is formed in the liver as the end product of the breakdown of protein. So that's why when we were looking before, like BUN falls into both the spleen and the kidney at the same time. So as this kind of breakdown of protein, high levels are going to suggest an impaired kidney function, either due to acute or chronic kidney disease, even though it can also mark increased production in the liver as a cause. So this shows up in 2 different categories, and high levels can indicate a decreased flow to the kidneys. It can be because of shock, stress. This will jump if you see someone post heart attack, if there's some sort of obstructed urine flow. So if there's kidney stones anywhere in the tract, this is going to kick up. And there can be a decreased volume in dehydration, or even, believe it or not, like severe burns or gastrointestinal bleeding. So it's an interesting marker. You know, there can be like malnutrition, but it's usually not used to diagnose malnutrition. So from a functional medicine standpoint, a lot of like naturopaths and like functional medicine folks will look at this as an indicator of amino acids in the body, or inadequate protein in the diet, or poor absorption of protein by a low urea reading. Right. So for example, we have to look at diet, right? If somebody's like a pizza vegan and they're not getting enough urea, or they're not getting enough protein, or if there's really, really super duper spleen yang deficiency or spleen qi deficiency, because they're not, there's something broken in the TNT and they're not absorbing protein, this is going to be low. Is this making sense so far to some of you guys who are on camera? Okay, great. So You know, overtraining can also be an issue with it. Low levels can indicate sometimes heavy metal exposure, liver dysfunction. But how we want to look at this, right, is that the ability of the body to absorb protein and really make that protein available is part of this post-heaven cheat, right? Like postnatal cheat. And what we're really looking at with fun is we're looking at this also through Gucci. So we have to have digestive fire. We have to have some sort of like stomach fire, spleen and stomach, for that transformation, that TNT of Gucci through the body. And that's actually all linked to urea measurements, even though it's sitting in the kidney. So a high, like a really high measurement of this, like let's look at what like high can indicate. So a high measurement can also often mean that there's some sort of heat in the middle jiao. That could be GU syndrome. So for example, SIBO, right? Like if somebody, like if we start seeing high BUN numbers and they're complaining of like nausea, gas, bloating, that kind of thing, we might want to be thinking like, hey, have you checked for SIBO with this? Is there a secondary infection because there's some sort of dysbiosis issue going on with the breakdown? There could be heat in the middle jiao or the lower jiao, which is going to be a GU, like I said, like it's a GU syndrome. Yin fire is another possible pathology with it. Like again, like yin fire is a bigger conversation. That was the morning speech that I gave at symposium, and I think the college still has that talk available for people if you want to see that talk. And hopefully, like in the next like 6 months or so, like I'll have some recorded, like other recorded like talks on it. Just because again, like yin fire is such like a bigger conversation. But coming back to BUN, it could be liver qi stagnation with heat or fire. Can be root or branch manifestation, because there's often a significant heat component in patients who have this high measurement. So you're going to have to think like, is there any sort of damp or heat that's banging up the spleen? And am I going to have to clear that damp or heat while at the same time healing the spleen? Is this helpful to you guys? Is this making sense? Right? So sometimes it's like, yeah. You're like, I see it. Like you have spleen qi deficiency. I got it. But then if you see this high BUN number, it's just like, shit, like I'm going to have to clear some heat that was like kind of low brewing that maybe I wasn't seeing. And the spleen is maybe having to contend with some of this heat that could be coming from the liver. So this can also be like a situation of liver overacting on spleen. And it might just be one of those like, yeah, I kind of thought that, but like now that's showing up in the BUN numbers, and okay, like so we are going to have to like calm the spleen. So maybe like we have to do a little bit of Sharyo-san. You know, or spleen is probably actually fine. It's just like the liver is being a finicky little bitch. So maybe I just have to do like a Chaihu Shugan-san instead to get it to calm down. And I don't necessarily have to like worry too much about the spleen. Like you do that with your other diagnostic markers, but hopefully this is something that can kind of back up your thinking just to check yourself. Now, low urea measurement can be seen when there's like a normal yang function of the lower jiao is impaired. So for example, like during pregnancy, low urea measurements are actually normal because the body's redirecting the flow of qi like into like different parts of the body. So like, you know, we're going to see like pregnancy, like different health states, like that's not something that we worried about. But if there's an impaired yang function, either due to like over exercise or sometimes like too high doses of vitamin C is another thing. Poor absorption of nutrients. Those are kind of the most common like clinical presentations of BUN. Okay, let's look at creatinine. So with creatinine actually describes the way that Gucci is transformed into kidney qi. Sorry. So it's like, you know, some of my other notes here. All right, so it's the measurement of the blood can can be compared to a 24-hour loading test. That's not something that's often done. You know, more often you're just going to see this as a regular blood test, because creatinine is filtered and excreted in the urine via the kidneys, and high levels usually indicate kidney disease. So I'm going to give you guys a really, really, really horrible, sad story to illustrate this. It's a heartbreaking story, but it'll stick with you. So we had to put my dog down about a month ago. It was really awful. It was really traumatic. It happened really, 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 really fast. He was fine on Friday, and we had to put him down by Sunday night. It was like shocking. And what happened with him is he had what we think he had was like and he was only like 7 years old, so it was surprising, but he had necrotizing pancreatitis. And what started to happen was his kidney started to shut down. So I had him in the veterinary ER on Sunday night, and his creatinine was 2.0. And I was like, okay, that's high. I'm not happy with that. You know, and he was woozy. He was a little weird, you know, like he wasn't like in the best place Saturday night. And then by Sunday night, we had him at AMC in the trauma center, and they ran his creatinine again, and it was a 6. And I was like, he's not coming back from that. There's no way to come back from that. That shows like his kidneys just like totally shut down. And so it was actually the creatinine test that, because I was like, I will burn Rome to save this dog, right? Like they're like, it's going to cost you $15,000, and I was like, I will give my kidney, I will do whatever to like save this dog. And then when I saw the numbers, I was just like, there's no saving it. So a horrible story, but like hopefully this illustrates something to stick with you, because high numbers of this is often going to indicate disease. And sometimes it can be elevated temporarily due to dehydration, but it's not going to jump from like a 2 to a 6 in dehydration. Sometimes it can jump from like 0.8 to like a 1.8, right? Because the kidneys, there's a little bit of yin deficiency. We're a little bit dried out. They're having to work a little bit harder. You know, if we're looking at, again, high, it's going to be the kidney qi deficiency or kidney yang deficiency. And low, it's really going to be like a spleen qi deficiency or some sort of impaired T and T functions. So sometimes we'll see really low levels of creatinine that can be due to malnutrition or severe weight loss and loss of muscle mass. You know, what I'm watching, and where we should all be watching, by the way, as I'm sure a lot of you have patients who have started taking like Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy, like all of that, we need to be looking at their creatinine, because some of them are winding up with low levels of creatinine because they're starting to lose muscle mass, because they're a little bit like malnourished. That's why, like, you know, we still haven't figured out how a lot of these semaglutides are working. We know they work, right? They save lives, like blah, 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 blah. You know, like one of the next drugs that are about to hit the market, they say it's going to be 20 times as strong as like Wegovy. And it's just like, Jesus Christ, what is that going to rip through? And where we need to be keeping our eyes like all the yin, right? Like all the zong. But we really need to be keeping our eyes on creatinine, as there can be severe fast weight loss, and there can be part of that weight loss is actually loss of muscle mass. And so the reading should be interpreted according to the patient's muscle mass, but that's not something that I've seen ever done in a Western office. Men typically have higher creatinine levels than women, and it just has to do with muscle mass. So from a Chinese medicine standpoint, where we want to be leaning into this, it can correspond to the lack of ability to maintain muscle mass, which is the spleen and is the earth element. So if a person has, did I flow through this? There we go. So if a person has low levels of creatinine concurrent with malnourishment and weight loss, that can start to represent a failure of the spleen to maintain muscle and flesh, and failures to actually adequately extract qi from the diet. So when we start seeing low levels of this, we really want to be thinking about how can we tonify spleen qi, even though it's considered a marker of kidney function in Western medicine. From a Chinese perspective, the creatinine really describes gu qi in the diet. You know, and so like what you might see concurrently with this is kind of the standard pale tongue, soft pulse, nausea in the morning, range of digestive disturbance. I mean, you guys know what spleen qi looks like, spleen qi deficiency. So a high creatinine is often created by a turnover of muscle mass that's unable to be excreted by the kidneys. And so again, over exercise, the spleen could be working overtime to maintain muscle mass and extract nutrients from the diet, or people could be taking creatinine supplements for it. Like they could be putting it in their shakes. They could be bodybuilders. They could be using this as a way to like bulk up like that mass. Okay, let's look at EGFR. So what EGFR is, it's one second here. So what if we're looking at EGFR here? So it's the estimated glomerular filtration rate. And so this is often, if it's impaired, it's often considered kidney deficiency. And so this is how fast are the kidneys filtering water. And what we want to think about is it's calculated taking into creatinine levels, patient's age, gender, and again, race, which is a whole separate conversation and needs to be like completely taken out of the Western medical establishment. This is also why often kidney disease is missed in African-American populations, because even if you read the lab reports, it will say EGFR if you're African American. And so this was a standard that was put in place like in the 50s, and it's a standard that just does not like hold up in Western medicine. And you just, regardless of race, you need to be looking at what that filtration rate is, right? So take out the race piece to it when you're reading whether they're Black, whether they're Latino, whether they're Asian, doesn't matter. Like, we just need to be looking at that as a little bit more standard. So with this, when we're looking at function, high, you can't filter fast enough. So there's really no number that's considered high in this. Because if it's good, it's good. That's great. Like your kidneys are A1, right? From a functional medicine, any number below 90 is considered to say like, okay, like they're not filtering fast enough, like they're not kind of putting it through the sieve fast enough. Could be adrenal fatigue. They're going to call it like an adrenal function from a functional medicine standpoint. So in Chinese, though, you know, again, it's really kidney qi is what we're looking at. So we're looking at a kidney qi deficiency, a kidney yin deficiency, or a kidney yang deficiency. And, you know, the kidneys receive the nourishment, transform it into kidney qi, blah, 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 blah. We can go through like all of that. But fatigue is generally a feature in all kidney disharmony, right? And so again, like what has led us to this place of taxation, you know, and during periods of acute infection or inflammation, you know, the patterns can change towards more a yin deficiency with or without empty heat. So you're going to want to like adjust your treatment according to that. Pain can also shift this. So acute inflammation is effectively resolved with acupuncture treatment, but pain can like shift something along these numbers. And like, are they getting like adequate rest? Are they avoiding cold environments? You know, when I see low EGFR, I think moxa. You know, moxa in order to restore yang, in order to restore filtration, because that's a yang function of something. Because, you know, and some of you, if you've studied with me before, the way that I think about yin and yang medically is yin is the pliability of the organ. If I were to Jeffrey Dahmer you and cut your kidneys out, would I want to eat them, or are they going to be dry and gross? If they're going to be dry and gross, that's kind of a kidney yin deficiency, right? Because there's no tissue integrity. They're not juicy. They're not nutrient dense. They're not full of blood. They're not full of they're not full of like all the good stuff that's going to make that a pliable, healthy organ that can make it 100 years. The yang piece to this is, how is that organ metabolically working? And EGFR is a direct reflection of how metabolically that kidney yang is filtering. You know, like all like what is it, the loops of Henle or whatever? Like, how are the loops going? Like, how are things like actually filtering through this? And so that's why we need to think of like a kidney 7 or a Jingui Shenshi 1 or something like in moxa, like in order to get that yang back into the system. Is this helpful so far to you guys? Starting to make some sense here? Good, we're good so far? Okay, great. Okay, let's jump into the liver because we like the liver, and whenever I think of the liver, I think of Grace Jones to this day. That's how I imagine the liver. If the liver were to walk in the front door, that's how she would look like. Okay, so the 4 big ones you want to keep an eye on that's going to come in a metabolic panel are going to be ALT, AST, ALP, and bilirubin. And so again, please don't quote this like anyone taking NCCOM. This is not what this stands for. So let's just be very clear about that. Okay. So I'm going to give you how I think of this is, I think of ALT as long-term. I think of ST as short-term. So what will happen is, like we can see here, like ALT and AST both check for liver damage or disease and assess liver health and function in a way, okay? So let's say ways that we can bang up how we can see these things in relationship to each other. Okay, let's say I go to Vegas for a Saturday and I go on a 24-hour bender, right? Like I just get like wasty pants. Like on a Saturday, my AST is going to spike, but that was a short-term one. And so that's going to spike for maybe up to 4, 5, 6 days. But as I filter that out, as long as I'm not going on a longer-term bender, right, it'll come back down. If I am a chronic alcoholic and I'm drinking all the time, my ALT is going to spike and my AST is going to spike. But let's say I go into rehab, right? And I've been drinking for years and years and years and my liver's all jacked up. It's maybe a little cirrhotic, right? But then I go into rehab, they put me on like low dose naltrexone and my liver starts to heal. The AST is going to go down, but that ALT is going to remain raised for a while until, because it's just, that's going to be a longer heal. Does that help? Does that make sense? So we want to look at these things in relationship to each other. We'll see them spiking. We'll see them both spiking very often in post-chemotherapy. We'll see them spiking in long-term medication use, right? So people that are having to take like Vivance or like Wellbutrin, like ADHD style stuff, or any sort of like the psychotropics, like this is really what they're looking at to see if like the ALT, AST is getting banged up. I like looking at these numbers, especially if you're doing like anything. I find with like Hashimoto or Fosho, like anything like the Hashimoto, I've had 3 patients go into jaundice with it. Mazen was here in New York a couple weeks ago, and I was actually talking with him offline about it because he prescribes really, really, really high doses of herbs, right? And in his practice in England, they use blood testing all the time. And he said for years, he tested all the patients really regularly to see like what the herbs were doing. And then because they were particularly worried about liver function. And he said a couple of years ago, they stopped that because there is a subset of people that aren't really able to metabolize the herbs so well, and it will bang up their livers. But that subset is so small that's the exception rather than the rule, right? And so he was like, "You've had three?" And I'm like, "I've had three, and I'm not even a high volume practice." And he's like, "Who the hell are you seeing?" And he's just like, I've seen three in like 15 years, and he has a high volume practice. So that being said, it's not that common, but it is like a nice marker if you're an herbalist, is you do want to be looking at some of this. Okay, so let's look at ALT first. So ALT, hold on, get to ALT. Okay, so
sorry to interrupt. There's a question in the chat box from Angie saying, how do you feel about giving Jingui Shenjiwan for kidney failure?
Well, it's what kidney failure, right? Like we'd have to like look at, so are we saying kidney failure, like kidney failure in my dog, right? Like with the high creatinine levels was not going to bring him back. If we're talking about kidney failure because somebody is diabetic and the glucose was mismanaged for a long time and they wound up on dialysis now, and they are the glomerular like filtration rate is like shot and they have like high creatinine and the glucose is still not managed, I would worry about the glucose management before I'd be worrying, because they're going to continue to bang up the kidneys, right? They're going to continue to create tissue damage, like unless that spleen is fixed, unless the earth is fixed enough to actually bank the water. I don't know if that makes sense or not. So stage 4 kidney failure, not diabetic. Kidney failure is from taking lithium. So are we talking about somebody that's going to wind up like kidney transplant? Are they on dialysis? I don't know. I'm just watching the chat box here. Just speak. Like put your mic on and speak. It's easier. Oh, okay. I don't think she wants to speak. So this was taken from lithium. So that does sound like the lithium caused some sort of like tissue damage. They're maybe close to like that looks like it's like a bigger conversation that I'm more than happy to have offline.
Sorry. I couldn't figure out where to unmute. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. So no, so his kidney failure is from taking lithium. And so I just didn't know if there is a potential ability to improve that taking Chinese herbs and maybe that formula.
I mean, again, you have to look at what else is going. I mean, we have to be very, very careful. Like it's Jingui Shenqiuan and kidney failure, not like a 1-to-1 correlation, right? We have to be looking at what the actual
right.
tissue.
And I just said that because you mentioned it, mentioned it briefly. I actually started him on Liwei Di Huang Wan, but when you talked about that, I thought of whether it would be helpful or not. So I just thought I'd ask.
I mean, like it might be helpful, right? Like if you started him on Liwei Di Huang Wan, I'm assuming you were seeing some sort of like kidney yin deficiency from the tissue damage that was happening. And so where my mind would go is like, do you see some of that kidney yin deficiency resolving and then leaning into something to help the kidney yang after that, right? Because we have to have enough yin to ground the yang. Like if there's not the yin there and you just throw them on like a Jingui Shenqiuan, you're just going to blow them out, like whatever other yang they have, right? Because it's just not enough to ground. So that's why, like, again, all this has to be taken in a broader context, and I'm happy to talk with you offline a little bit more about that case if you want.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Yep. Okay, so let's just jump back into this. So ALT, so the purpose of this is it's required as the breakdown, and it's a key step in the Krebs cycle. If you guys can remember, like your bio classes in high school and power the mitochondria type stuff, right? So this is very definitely like in that realm, and ALT can fluctuate during the day. So once a high or low reading is not considered to be significant without other markers of disease. And again, like we take it in context. So it's usually elevated as a result of liver damage. But the actual value from a Western standpoint is very rarely of no prognostic significance, which I just think is bonkers. But we can see high levels, for example, in diabetes, we'll see high levels with EBV, mono, viral hepatitis, range of diseases that related to congestive heart failure, cholesterol medication, antipsychotics, antibiotics are all things that will kick this up. If we look at this though, from like a Western standpoint, low numbers are not actually considered to be clinically significant. But from an Eastern standpoint, we need to be thinking about a blood deficiency or a liver Qi deficiency. Now, liver Qi deficiency is another conversation that we can have, because I feel like a lot of students have come to me recently and they're just like, nobody has ever told me that liver Qi deficiency exists. And it's just like liver Qi deficiency, it's actually like Dr. Shirt used to talk about this all the time. Like liver Qi deficiency, it's in New York in particular, it's massive. And so from a functional standpoint, medicine standpoint, they're looking at like B vitamins with this. Fine, whatever, maybe a little bit of choline, something like that. But from a Chinese medicine standpoint, we want to be thinking about how much qi the liver needs to exert to keep qi in blood moving, right? Because it's not just enough to have qi, you have to have enough qi to move the qi, and you have to have enough qi to move the blood. So exercise is going to increase that, movement and exertion move liver qi. So, it's sometimes like, you don't need meat, you just need to go to the gym, right? Like you just maybe need like to go for a run, like you need like just to move your body. So, but strenuous exercise that actually goes beyond the comfortable limits of qi in blood can lead to liver and qi blood deficiency. It's a form of taxation, which are two possible patterns of raised ALT. So elevated lead levels can put like a strain on that too. And I hate to say it, in New York, I see quite a bit of elevated lead levels because of the old pipes and whatnot. I had a patient a couple of years ago. Again, I was like, you don't need me, you need to move. I think you have lead poisoning, because all his issues started to kick up when he moved into this new. And this was a patient that I was seeing during the pandemic, and I was doing a virtual with him, and I had this, so we're talking and I was multitasking, and I was like, when did you move? Like, how old is this building? And we looked at the building, and the building was 120 years old, and there was, I guarantee there was lead pipes in there, and so really things like he had all these like crazy numbers jump in his blood work around that time. And I was just like, I really think it's because there's an environmental component to it that the liver is just not able to filter, And so again, like I said before, like certain medications can raise it, young impairing medicinals, but again, low ALT, blood deficiency. So if I see this as low, I think blood deficiency, and you can think about like siwutongs, you can think about blood builders, I think about methylated B complexes as blood, the same way that I think about blood builders, like a siwutong or something. So if I'm thinking there's a blood deficiency, this is another place that I'm going to lean into. Now, with the AST, so this is one that gets like a little wonky in how like Pyers talks about this. So she talks about AST from a Chinese medicine standpoint. She talks about it from like an emotional point of view. Normal function of AST allows the heart to learn and remember. Again, this is one of those places where she's making a little bit of a jump here, but how she got to this. So how she got to this place is that AST is linked with the neurotransmitters glutamate and aspirate. So she's really going, like, I don't know, I think she's minority reporting this one a little bit much, where like she's pulling like different pieces together. So because it's linked to these neurotransmitters, which are specifically involved in memory and learning, what she's doing is linking memory and learning to the heart and Shen. So her argument is that from an emotional point of view, the normal functioning of AST allows the heart to learn and remember. So if abnormal levels of neurotransmitters are present, the heart's ability to control other aspects of the spirit becomes impaired, and we're going to wind up with a little bit of a Shen disturbance. So high, like her argument is that it's going to be damp heat or heat in the liver. And then low is really going to be an inability of liver yin or blood to anchor or house the hun. So she's gone a little bit out there. Low AST levels linked with the inability to, let me keep that here. Inability to focus, insomnia, restlessness that indicate spirit is not anchored, can indicate the heart and liver spirits have been affected. So she's really getting into the Shen and the Hun. Yin and blood form a functional foundation that anchors the Hun. Liver yin and blood deficiency is indicated by low AST. Fine. I still think of this from a Chinese medicine standpoint is that we went on a bender over the weekend. Right? Like I really think about that something short-term banged up the liver, and that like we can often give people a pass. And that if we're going to see an increase of AST, we want to get ahead of that kind of toxicity, whether that's damp heat or some sort of heat toxin. We want to get ahead of that before it goes into the ALT. So I often think of AST as a precursor that we really do want to just kind of keep an eye on. I'm going to skip over ALP just because I want to get to some of the good stuff here with you guys, and I'm going to skip over bilirubin. I'm so sorry. I'm still workshopping this lecture, so I apologize, but I want to get to CRP with you because I think CRP is an unsung hero in blood testing. So CRP is an acute phase protein that rises in response to inflammation within the body. So the way that I think of CRP, like if this helps or not. So another way to like think about like CRP is think about the cardiovascular system. This is showing us how much low-grade internal heat is happening within the tubes. So if you think of I think of the cardiovascular system almost as a garden hose. And if the inside of the garden hose is clear and free and easy, then the blood is going to be able to move clear and free and easy because the inside of the hose is smooth and nothing's going to get caught on it. If, however, the inside of that garden hose is kind of janky and kind of inflamed, what's going to happen is things are going to start to catch on it. Mineral deposits are going to start to catch on it. And like the water is still going to be able to move through the garden hose, but it's not going to be able to move as well. And what's going to start to happen is that garden hose is actually going to start to get stiffer and stiffer and stiffer. So a mark of actually a pliable cardiovascular system is flexibility. And I'm not saying that you have to stand and palm, like you can stand and palm the floor and still have like a wonky cardiovascular system. You can stand and palm the floor and still have like genetically high lipidemia, right? But we do want the garden hosing to be bending and pliable. And what will often happen, it's an acute phase protein that rises in response to inflammation within the body. And it can often show as a precursor to GU syndrome. So we often see it in some sort of infection with people. And what starts to happen though is it's often considered a marker Western wise of inflammation within the heart. But then the question is like, why is there inflammation in the heart? And so that inflammation could be coming from like a blood heat, a heat toxin, damp heat, a yin deficiency, blood stasis that's leading to that. We will often see LDLs and HDLs start to creep up. So the lipid profile is going to start to creep up because it's getting caught on the jankiness on the inside of the tube. And so it's just kind of like a volume thing. So what will often happen as the tube starts to smooth out, you know, and things are able to move, we're not going to have as much plaquing. But this is definitely considered a marker, yes, in the West for heart disease, for people who are at risk for that. And low, they're just like, well, there's no significance if there's like not heat in the body necessarily. But I really think that this is a massive unsung hero. And it's something that's so grossly like overlooked. And because the range is pretty big to it, they just say like under 10. So if you're at a 12 versus a 6 versus an 8, you know, the elevated CRP could be genetics, but it could also be sedentary lifestyle, stress, exposures to toxins. You know, if patients are like, I only have like a cup of coffee a day, maybe, right? But like coffee and alcohol can also elevate a CRP, as does exposure to dietary allergens. So we can start seeing if there's like underlying spleen qi deficiency and heat that they weren't getting to. So of course, you know, like you lose a little weight, like you avoid alcohol, caffeine, and cigarettes, that kind of thing, you know, but it's as a non-specific marker of inflammation that's present in many, many, many diseases with wide-ranging symptoms. It can be an overall marker of yang function and how well the body is actually containing yang. So elevated C-reactive can be an indication of stagnation and heat-related disharmonies. So we want to start looking for, you know, I use this all the time with yin fire, which is going to bring me back to the spleen. I use this for, is there an undiagnosed damp heat condition in some way? So again, is there a hidden occult infection that hasn't been caught in the blood work? And maybe like sometimes you'll feel like a buzzing in the pulse with it, where there's some sort of latent pathology. Like I'll see this in Lyme's disease, where patients are like, maybe I have it, like maybe I don't, like I'm right on the border. I'm like, I don't know, your CRP is at 9. You know, well, it's within normal range. It's like, yeah, but like, you know, like in a healthy situation, it should probably be under 3. Like, I think you're creeping up, and I think there is some sort of like hidden pathogen that we might want to take a deeper look at. And we see it all the time, like autoimmune related conditions, you know. So if somebody's just like, you'll see CRP start to creep up if they have like high ANA levels, they have high marker levels for other like non-specific autoimmune. So, but this is one that, you know, before, like a metabolic panel and a CBC panel is so common, doctors are not necessarily going to jump into like an ANA or a deeper dive unless you're going to a rheumatologist or you're going to an endocrinologist. And I will tell you, like an endocrinologist appointment, a lot of them have a 6-month wait list right now. Rheumatologists in New York, some of them have a 3-month wait list. So, you know, this gives us a chance to say like, okay, well, we're waiting for 6 months for you to go to the endocrinologist. This shit's just going to keep creeping up and up and up and up. So until you get there, what can we use in our medicine to keep this contained, right? And a lot of times these CRPs can creep up and the patient is feeling fine, like within fine. But if you start to see this elevated, we're starting to really get into kind of a more dangerous heat toxin, I think, damp heat scenario, yin fire scenario. That again, like the blood work is not an end all be all, but it's just there to kind of back us up a little bit, and it's there to really highlight blind spots we might be having in our diet, because none of us are like amazing diagnosticians. I think we can all use help diagnosing, and it's something that we have to continue to study and continue hammering at like the rest of our careers. So again, I hope this conversation was a good start for this. I think we can see how we all have work to do with this, and I think we can see like how this warrants maybe like some longer classes at some point, or a little bit deeper diver, but hopefully this has whetted your appetite to start looking at some of the blood work that patients are bringing in.